I have a ad to show you, actually, our first Beacon webinar commercial, so we're going to pull that up first. And we really want to thank the advertisers and our sponsors because we've just been providing a bunch of free programming for our members, and we couldn't do it without all of our wonderful sponsors.
Hi, I'm Pat Schaefer, co-founder of Silo Busting Networking. Most of us don't think about networking unless we're looking for a job or our next customer. But research has found that effective networking within organizations creates cultures of high performance and leads to major business benefits. Many traditional organizations are built around siloed hierarchies. They find it hard to respond to change with agility. This is why we've developed Silo Busting Networking, a brand new program of skill-building workshops designed to ignite your employees' ability to create strategic networks and break down obstacles to better performance. If silos are preventing your employees from working together to accomplish important business goals, we can definitely help. So take the first step today. Email info@silobustingnetworking.com to request your free copy of the white paper, Don't Let Silos Kill Your Company, and learn more about the strategic networking skills that matter most for every organization.
So Glenna has shared with me that you know her, she knows you, which is great to have such an intimate gathering of friends. And I love how Janine came on the line and said, my friends are here. And that's what I was looking forward to today as well. But I'll just give some few introductory comments to our esteemed speaker, an interdisciplinary social scientist who, when I read her book, I think the first thing that grabbed me was that she completed her bachelor's and master's degrees in 4 years, and then bravely left the workforce to start and to earn her doctorate over 3 years, took a leap of faith, left the Midwest for Washington, D.C. without a job in hand, but boy did it pay off because she did the best postdoc ever, being appointed to a role in President Ronald Reagan's administration. And we are fortunate to receive the journey, the result of that journey, all of the wisdom that she can share with us today about the networks beyond what we think of in our career networking. And I can just share with you, as I read Glenna's book, I'm just more and more inspired about what steps that I need to take in my life and around my networks. And I hope that she brings that you feel that after her presentation to us this morning. So I'll turn it over to Glenna. Thank you, Glenna, for joining us today. And can't wait to hear your advice and your sage advice for us.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm going to screen share now. Zoe, would you please confirm for me you've got it? See my title slide?
Yep, we've got it.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say I do feel like I'm among friends, and thank you really very much. I will take questions throughout this discussion today. Heather's going to help by watching the chat because I'm not sure that I can do that and also get through all the content that I have teed up. We do have one poll question to start this session today. Would you please launch that? So what I'm interested to know is the answer to this question. In terms of your reason for logging in today, is it for professional reasons because you're coaching people or you're managing people, for personal, or for both? The results are shaping up pretty much the way I thought they might. If only voting for a president was quite this easy. We'll get to that online voting one of these days. Or share these results. It was interesting to watch the change because at the start, we had a lot of professional and then the personal came online. And then I think everybody read through all the questions and realized it might be both. And that really would be something that I would hope today for everyone. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with some stories. Those stories are really important to me because without the people who had this experience, I would not have kept going. At the outset, I thought what I'm going to talk about today was just for me. When people started noticing that I was different, because it did change me, and they wanted to know what I was doing, and I told them and they had successes, that's when I realized that there was something more here, that it wasn't just a one-off, that there were some universal principles to share. We'll talk about then beyond the basics of networking, but to talk really about network dynamics. I'm going to introduce you to a structure and a nomenclature that is new, that got created from this research, and then to talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities that we all face. Now, let's start with some of the stories. This is the first one. This is a work-life balance issue, specifically related to a woman who was really quite exceptional, both in the sciences and in the creative and marketing arts. Probably one of the most talented and energetic creative people that I've ever met. She left a job making more than $250,000 a year because she'd adopted 2 children and both of them had special needs. When she did the data collection, her response to me was, Glenna, you liberated me, you gave me data. What she did not realize, and most of us don't, is just the workload that she had. In particular, in this case, she was managing 47 people for just one of her 2 children. The older one, he had Asperger's. In addition to that, the family was struggling at the time because he was seeing 3 female psychiatrists, but he was 13, and she wanted him to see a man now. And they found a good one, but he was $400 an hour. And she was trying to figure out whether to work that into her budget. Well, here was the outcome. When she saw this data, she realized that she herself had really been burned out by the 3-time-a-week crises that she had in school. So she confronted the school and got him into a special school as an alternative. She fired the 3 female psychiatrists and replaced them with the new male psychiatrist, not only saving the family overall money, but saving her and her husband the time of carting him to 3 different visits a week. She was able to go back to work, and I do follow a lot of these people longitudinally. It's a decade later. This young boy not only graduated from high school a year early, but as a young man, he entered Temple University, where he studied for 2 years, lived in an apartment with 3 other young men, something truly extraordinary for a young man with Asperger's. And now, a decade later, he is a cybersecurity specialist in the US Army and is about to re-up for his second tour of duty. Now, here's another situation. This is a case of a family whose child of a 6-year-old was diagnosed with a food allergy. Now, what that meant is that the parents had to tell everybody who might be with that child when they were not around. And for most of a child's waking hours, and you know this if you've ever had one, they are outside the direct supervision of the parent. Now, altogether, this mom had a total of 625 people in her networks. That arrangement of that configuration is something you'll see later. Now, assuming it took her about 30 minutes to tell everybody, that took 12 working days. And something that I'd like you to keep in mind, if you're ever in a situation of coaching or management, and a situation like this arises in the course of a family's life. Now, mom and dad divided that workload, and then dad became, quote unquote, kind of the enforcer. If something went wrong and somebody gave this child his food allergen and he wound up in the emergency room. I want to show you just a little bit, though, here about how the family used an analog methodology and something that you might consider for yourself if you've got an issue you're tracking that is important enough. What they did was go network by network in the configuration you're going to see later, listed all of the types of people in that network, their names, and then charted a course to determine whether there could be a risk, or in your own case, where there might be an opportunity, whether they had contacted that person, and whether they had gotten a kind of intuitive sense that, in fact, that person was going to be very, very helpful to them in managing their children's health, their child's health. Now, here's another one, and one of my favorites. This is a woman who is single, and her elderly mother was living with her. This woman has a retail business down around South Street in Philadelphia, And she is the only business owner in any of her networks. So she has no immediate friends or family members or people she goes to church with or whatever who are also business owners, that they don't understand what her life is. So as a caregiver, that made her business life more challenging. And in addition to that, what she realized when she gathered the data is that she had a lot of friends who were sabotaging her health. She was trying to lose weight, but they would bake a cake and they would bring it over to the house and want to sit down and have cake and coffee. Now, she had an interesting analogy about all of the connections in her life. She said, you know, it looks like a garden. And I'd like to prune these bushes over here, but if I do, you know, they're actually shading something that's important to me. Or I'd like to pull that weed, but if I do, I will pull up a nice flower along with it. So she was very, very careful in how she approached all of her connections. She found an alternative way for her mother to get care. Specifically, it was a sister who had high school age children, and they loved having grandma around. Now, the outcome for her is that within about 6 months, she was able to triple the size of her footprint in her Philadelphia business, had the bandwidth to negotiate a better rent from her landlord. She started a nonprofit, and she started to attract the attention of national media. I did a bit of follow-up with her yesterday in preparation for today, and I found out that she has just been offered her own television show in some sort of a national network, and so she's about to begin that. Well, here's another story. This was a man who has an IT firm. He and his wife had just bought a home outside their city in near Spokane, Washington. They got 2 kids who are now starting in a new school. He has a very, very fast-growing business, and the new house they have means he's going to have a much longer commute every day. Now, at the same time, they had other families that they were good friends with. Kids were about the same age. They had a nice mix of boys and girls. They all enjoyed outdoors. And it became really exciting when somebody posed the idea that perhaps what they should do is all buy a cabin together. Each family would have some time there on their own, and then from time to time, all of the families would gather, and boy, did that sound good, especially to the kids. Now, this person, my friend, was getting a little bit worried about it. So what he did was use this framework to take a look at all of the added work that he would have to engage in. He also realized that his friends had no experience in business, that a lot of the legal and the accounting complexity was going to fall to him, and that there could be problems ahead with the relationships if anything went wrong. So what he hit upon in doing this analysis is they didn't have to buy something. They didn't have to create a timeshare. If they wanted to be together, they could just rent the same place together. Now, I haven't followed up with him, but I can only imagine that given the fires in that region, he's altogether more happy that he doesn't have a piece of property sitting there that he might be worried about. Now I'm going to tell you about a little different type of situation, and I'm showing you here a different, a sort of a data display for the first time. All of the data that I'm showing you is actual data. This is actually identified data. Use all of this with the permission of the individuals involved, and in this case specifically. This is a man, and his wife was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. This sort of a diagnosis later in the course of a couple's lifetime is not uncommon. If not this one, then some other one. What I wanted to show you here so that you have some appreciation for the complexity, but also for the value of having the structure and the nomenclature that I'll tell you about, is that we've identified 278 different types of people that you might encounter in a hospitalization. Now, from that list, this man, Alan, identified 79 types that he managed on behalf of his wife when she was in the hospital. Now, this is just the hospital. It does not include the community or any of the radiation facilities that he went to, or anything like that. And it doesn't include the numbers. So a pharmacist is a type, but there may have been 3 or 4 pharmacists. You know, a hospital is a type, but there may have been several. So you can see what he was managing. Of the 38 different clinical providers, for example, 20 of them were different types of nurses. So in any situation like this, you can understand the importance of getting information and assistance from people who really do know their way around this kind of a problem, so that you are not additionally stressed in trying to manage the rest of your life and then this particular situation and its outcome. Now, just a couple of things about retirement planning. If you've noticed, I'm kind of working through the life cycle. A number of people who have heard about this or have read my book were people who were in the midst of planning their retirement. And many of them were making one of two choices. Either we are going to relocate to an over 55 community in a nice place where we've always enjoyed vacationing, like Florida maybe, or we are going to move to be closer to our adult children and our grandchildren. Now, once they looked at all the networks, they decided that there were better choices that they could make. For example, they didn't have to actually buy a home in an over 55 community and move there. They could rent one during high season and play golf as much as they wanted in the wintertime. And they could go visit family whenever they wanted. But the alternative of picking up and moving and having to reestablish all of the connections that they have with physicians, dentists, roofers, lawn care people, realtors, friends, they decided their networks were here. And so this is the place that they wanted to stay. And then this is one of my favorite. This is a woman who, at the age of 87, had a serious illness. It turned out to be misdiagnosed and then finally correctly diagnosed as C. difficile, something that in a person of her age is often fatal. Over the course of 18 months, she was pretty seriously ill, in and out of the hospital a lot. And what that did was cause predictable caregiver burnout, both in terms of the family, but also in terms of the neighbors. And in case you don't know, caregiver burnout is the #1 reason why people wind up in assisted living. So those considerations were really afoot when this methodology became known. Now, in analyzing her networks, there were 3 that were suboptimal. She was committed to remaining independent, and so she did the work to improve those networks. And like one of them was her fitness network. So she got a trainer, she started working out in the gym, things like that, regained her strength. So we follow up about every 6 months. We're now at about 36 months in follow-up. She's 92 right now. She is still living independently in her own home. She's probably saved about $200,000 in assisted living, and has saved Medicare a lot of money too. Now, this is particularly poignant at a time like this when COVID is such a challenge for people, because her being in assisted living right now would further risk her health and actually and her life. I want to stop now and find out if, in the context of any of these case studies, you've got any questions for me. All right, so let's look beyond some of the basics here. So first of all, this might seem obvious, but it's not. I mean, we are literally hardwired to connect. We do this from the time we are born. Some people suggest we even do it before that. So this is not a trivial matter, the way that we connect with one another. A couple of things about how meaningful that is. If we have good connections, we have a greater chance of surviving, of having satisfied lives, and of being successful in every respect, and that includes in our careers. If we have bad connections, it's going to interfere with our sleep, it'll increase blood pressure and stress hormones. In addition to that, bad connections predict depression, the onset of chronic illness, and a shorter lifespan. Loneliness, and please remember this in the context of the COVID era, is more damaging to your health than obesity, smoking, and alcoholism. It seems to me it's really, I think, one of the worst things that happened in the aside from the most, clear deaths and disability that's resulting from COVID, is that the message has been to socially distant. The message should have been be physically distant and socially connected. The Surgeon General of the United States, even before COVID, acknowledged that loneliness was a public health crisis. And that is very true. So the message to be socially distant is exactly the wrong one. And please join me in trying to shift that paradigm. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the data on two specific items, and that's depression and income or career advancement. If you are a depressed person who has a friend who is also depressed, chances are it's going to be harder for you to move past that depression. If you are a person who is not depressed, who has a friend who is depressed, you are likely to become depressed, and particularly if the two of you are the same gender. You are even more likely to be depressed if the two of you have a friend in common who is also depressed. What we're learning is that these conditions, depression is one, obesity is one, actually spreads through networks like an infectious disease. So if you happen to be coaching someone, for example, and they are depressed, and even if they are on medication and it does not appear to be working, one of the things to explore with them is the degree to which there may be other people who are depressed within their networks, and determine whether it's the fact that the medication isn't working. Is it because of the medication and they may be on the wrong one? Or is it because they are also in a network that is depressed, that is suppressing what the efficacy of that medication might be? Now, also want to talk about income. You may have heard that you will never be more successful, you will never make more money than the average of your 5 best friends. Now, there's a reason for that. Every network has a center of gravity. If you are below that center of gravity, it will pull you up. Now, I learned this playing tennis, although I didn't realize it at the time. If I played with a better player, my game was better. On the other hand, if you are above that center of gravity, it will pull you down. Now, in addition to that, the people in your networks will sabotage your success. If you are looking like you are getting ahead too far of the rest of the pack. Now, by the way, this is not because they are bad people. This is something that they are doing unconsciously, and they are doing it because we survive in groups. So if you look like you're leaving because you're so much more successful and savvy and so on, then their tendency is going to be to worry about themselves. What's going to happen to me if you leave? And I have tons of stories to tell you about that, but particularly for those of you who are working with people who are first generation college students, first generation business owners, first generation professionals who are moving up in the ranks. This is a really important thing to understand, that dynamic, because as their networks are sabotaging them, they are sabotaging themselves. So if you've ever been in a situation, even for yourself, or you've watched somebody who's self-sabotaging, just consider whether that may be one of the dynamics at play. And what that also means strategically is that if you want to get ahead, friend up, as someone said. Now, this is difficult for us sometimes because we're actually very limited in the way that we think about the people around us. When I first started to do this, by the way, it took me well over 8 hours to identify close to 139 people that were in my life outside of my career, just everything outside of, except for my career. But even so, in all that time, there were tons of people that I forgot. It wasn't winter, for example, so I forgot about the guy who shoveled the snow. And it wasn't tax season. I didn't put my accountant on the list. We tend to focus on what is nearest to us. And here's an example in a different way. So Harvard students were given a few minutes to draw Harvard Square and Harvard Yard. The reality is not one student did it accurately. Now, there's an objective map. Students studied it before they came to campus. I'm sure that they could make it around that campus at night with a few beers under their belt with no problem at all. But ask them to draw it, and it wasn't accurate. Those people who didn't study very much, well, the library was smaller. They didn't even add it to the map. They tended to focus on the things that they liked, where they socialized with friends, and totally forgot about the non-campus housing that would ring around the campus. That's the same way that we are very much in our relationships. Oops, I'm going the wrong direction. There. Now, there's another thing that's limiting us too, and that's our brain capacity. If you've heard of Dunbar's number, have you? Is that a familiar number to you? Dunbar's number is 150. That is the average number of people that we can relate to well. Now, what that means is, you may not know their name, but if you met each other on the street, you would acknowledge one another. You might know whether you could trust them. Would they be willing to loan you money? Would you be willing to loan them money? Could you go to them and ask for a favor? That's limited by the size of our neocortex. And this has been pretty stable for a very long time, dating back to Neolithic villages, and is even seen today. Modern day Amish and Hutterite communities, when they reach 150, split up. Because after 150, mutual cooperation breaks down. Workplaces that have more than 150 employees have more absenteeism to show for it. Now, by the way, can we manage more than 150? Sure. I've seen people do it. If you've got a good smart device, if you've got a good assistant, if you're healthy, physically and mentally and emotionally healthy, if you are supported in your life, you can manage more, but the number is not unlimited. Now, making this distinction between primary support and transactional connections is one of the things that will help you do that. Now, but most of us are hampered by that. We don't make this distinction, and so we treat everybody equally. Now, when I say treat them equally, I am not suggesting that some people are less valuable than other people and that they should be treated with any less dignity than a human being deserves. However, you've got to decide where you're going to place your energy. Where are your priorities? And I like to suggest that there are 3 levels of those. Now, once you understand my 3, you may decide that there's a 4th or a 5th. And if you do, I'd like to know about it, by the way, because I'm always trying to enrich this. Let me tell you the story about how I realized this could be important. I was in London with a client group. We finished our work one afternoon. All the Europeans could fly home, but there was one other American and I. We couldn't leave until flights back to the US the next day. We decided that night that we would go to the theater. Now, we wanted to do different shows, so we thought, we'll do the show we want, and then we'll come back to the hotel and we'll have a nightcap in the bar and we'll trade reviews. Now, this is important to the story because of what happened next. We were, of course, then in different taxi cabs coming back to the hotel. In that 2 or 3 minute cab ride, the cab driver found out that she was an American going home the next day, asked her flight time, and said he would be at the hotel at 8:15 to pick her up. She was telling me this as we had a drink that night. I was explaining to her, this being her first time in London, I was in and out of London a lot in that era, that 8:15 was not enough time. What I knew is that she was going to be subjected to an entirely additional search once she got into the terminal, because there was extra security for flights going back to the United States. And 8:15 wasn't enough time. So I told her, I said, no, please, I'm not 1 minute later than 8 o'clock. And here's why. Now, by the way, she fought me. She said, but I promised him. Now, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know what she did. We were going back to different cities in the US. I was on a different flight the next day. But I thought about her a lot. I thought, she's got a husband and 2 children under the age of 5 waiting for her back in the United States. She's been away for 3 days already. It's not like she was a single gal who would enjoy another night in London on the company, because the company would have paid if she missed that flight. Why is it that she picked a taxi driver that she met and engaged with for 2 or 3 minutes, as opposed to a husband that she promised her life and children she gave life? I thought about that for 2 years, and then I caught myself doing it. So that's when I realized there had to be a way to distinguish between people, to make some distinctions, and here are mine. So the first group are ones I call primary. These are the people who are closest into your heart. They are the dearest to you. Family, your best clients, your boss if you're employed in a company. You wouldn't go a day without thinking about them. If they died, if they cut off the connection with you, you would be devastated. They're the ones who are most important. And by the way, you had better put yourself on that primary list, especially when you hear about the next type. So for everybody who is primary in your life, you have certain intentions. I don't mean goals. I don't mean SMART goals. I mean general directional intentions. You want your children to grow up to be healthy and well-educated and enculturated in your traditions. You want to be successful and healthy, okay? You engage people to help you do that. Teachers, coaches, doctors, the parents of your children's friends, your networking groups, they are support people to you. They're easier to replace than anybody who is primary. Everybody else is transactional. The wait staff in restaurants, a taxi driver, and so on. Doesn't mean they aren't human beings who deserve dignity. But what it means is you're not going to take them soup if they get sick, all right? That you're not going to give the best of yourself away to people who are transactional, that you're going to hold people who are support accountable, because the primary connections you have in your life are that important and needs to do so. Now, I want to say as well, you can't minimize the impact that even somebody who is transactional can have. If she did not take my advice and she waited for that cab driver until 8:15 and she missed her flight, that cab driver, that transactional connection would have had a substantial impact on the primary connections in her life. Okay, so, and then finally, one of the things that I'm also taken by, and this was an insight that came from my attorney, I'll let you read this while I talk about it, is that even though in my education and in some pretty extraordinary on-the-job training that I had when I was at Merck, even though I was trained in ethics, nobody ever commented to me that keeping my house in order and all of my connections in order actually rose to the level of something that was an ethical endeavor. That the work that I was doing with people and for people was so important that it really merited that level of care and consideration. So I think that it's something that, at least within the professional dialogue, I'd like to introduce. Before I talk about the particular structure that got us here, I want to pause again and ask if any questions at this point. Heather, I'm not hearing from you, so I'm assuming not.
Correct.
All right. Okay, so how did all of these people that had better outcomes in their life, how did they get there? And so let me tell you a little bit about how I got there. My work is ethnographic. If you know the work of Brene Brown, I'm a little bit like her in the sense that I don't go into a venture thinking that I have an answer that I have to either prove or not. I sort of sat in the middle of life with people. Kids as young as 7. I tried a 4-year-old, by the way, that didn't work. 7 appears to be about the youngest you can go in doing this kind of work. And as I said, now I'm up to talking to people who are 92. I just kind of put them in the middle and looked out at everything and collected information about who were they relating to and how were they doing that. I developed this standard nomenclature out of it, tested it with a lot of people. They said it was pretty intuitive. And what I like about this is that it's valid across nations for those of you who might work internationally, and it's valid across cultures for those of you who might be working with different cultures, even within this country. The method of how you use this is really pretty simple, and you saw that in what I sent to you before, or Zoe on my behalf sent to you before this. It's 3 steps. Become aware of who you're connected to. Nobody is, I'm gonna say. I wasn't either when I started. Clarify what it is you want and need. And by the way, I hadn't done that either well enough before I started. And then transform your networks accordingly. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of different types of networks just to frame this. First of all, are life networks, and there are 8 of them. 5 I call birthright networks because you were born into them. Your family created these for you. If you have children, you've created these for your children. And it makes pretty good sense, right? A family network, a health and vitality network, and so on. We'll talk more specifically about these a little bit and where there are both some challenges as well as some opportunities in each. And then finally, coming of age networks. Your career, where we usually think about networking. Your home, what kind of a household do you live in? Are you buying or renting? That makes a big difference. Personal affairs, think people like your accountant, your lawyer, your car dealer. And then finally, a network that I did not go looking for, but that I call ghosts. People who used to be in your life who are no longer. Now, one of the things that I've begun to notice as I've worked with more and more people is that when it comes to your career, the strengths and the weaknesses of every other network will show up in force. So I'm doing another program in a couple of weeks, and my key message to that group, it's principally women who are starting companies and in the biopharma sector. My principal message to them is, for the next month, stop networking and look at the rest of your networks and make sure that they are in good shape so that they can support you as you step out onto the career stage, because otherwise you're on thin ice if they're not going to support you. Now, there's another category of networks that go with what I would call life events. So, you know, a lot of common ones you would realize. You're going to have a wedding or buy a home. People are going to come into your life. They're going to help you do that. And then when that event is over, they leave pretty much. I mean, you may retain a friend for a long time. The florist you use at your wedding may become the florist you use for years to come. But again, they're people who come together to help you through an event. To the degree that your life networks are good, it will help you to make it through these events that may occur in your life. Conversely, to the degree that the event networks are good, then they are going to help you in the rest of your life. So just as an example for me, I lived in a home in Fort Washington with lots of mature trees. So I had an arborist come out every year and check the trees and remove any that could threaten the house. My neighbors didn't do that. And so one day I noticed sounded like a firecrackers going off next to me. No, it wasn't firecrackers. It was my neighbor's tree coming down on my roof. Now, because I had an arborist with a long-term relationship, even though it was a weekend, he was there within 20 minutes. He got that tree off my roof without causing any additional damage. So I was really lucky in that case. So there was a situation in which that event was supported by somebody who was in my life network as somebody helping me to retain and manage my home. That otherwise that tree could have taken out about a third of my house, and what was not only my bedroom and a master bathroom, but was also my home-based office. It would have been a pretty dire situation in that day before all of my data was in a cloud, by the way. So let's talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities. I want to come back to this particular guide, which helped you to see some of the types of people in this various networks. After this session today, you are going to receive from Zoe a Word document that looks like this. Here I'm showing you the 5 birthright networks. You'll have this page for the birthright networks, another page for your coming of age networks, and a third page for pet networks in the event you have a pet, because pets have networks too. We'll talk about that in just a minute. This is fully editable. Some people like this as a way of recording either the types of connections they have or the people that they have connections with as an alternative to the little step down analog version of the workbook that I've sent you. By the way, my goal is to produce this as an app. It is designed, and my partner and I are currently looking for the capital to get it coded so that you can actually gather all this information in about 15 or 20 minutes in the app instead of this way. But I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So if this is worthwhile for you now, I want you to have it available. Now, what I'm going to do now is go through each of these networks and talk some about what the challenges and or the opportunities are. Now, first of all, I categorize 4 different groups within the family network. Your family of origin, the one you were born into, the family today, whatever that may be, former family. If you or your spouse or life partner were ever partnered before, even if you didn't have children together, there may be trailing versions of relationship that are coming into your life right now. And then, quote, just like family. People that are not related to you by blood or marriage, but you think of them as family and you include them as family events. Now, they provide us with a number of things that are pretty obvious here, so I'm not going to mention them in any great detail, but I do want to talk about a couple of things. Families today are among the most stressed of the networks, and that was before COVID. So first of all, they're smaller. They're about half the size that they were 50 years ago. What that means is that parents have fewer people around to help them with children, and seniors have fewer people around to help them in the aging process. In addition to that, families are disrupted. Only 20% of families today are once married couples with children. I want to say that again. If you are married and you and your spouse have children, and this is your only marriage, you are practically a unicorn. You represent only 20% of families today. Half of families are single parent. The other ones are divorced, blended, remarried families, and sometimes very complicated configurations. Or they are grandparents taking care of grandchildren because of opioids. In addition to that, and I think we see a lot of this in the Philadelphia area, 40% of people, adults, live on average 700 miles from where they were born and raised. Now, that happens particularly if they were good in the STEM subjects in high school. First, they move for college and then they move for jobs. 20% of retirees relocate. So we have huge geographic separations as well. And then, even if you've got family around, women are the traditional caregivers and they're in the workforce. So moms and sisters and aunts no longer have the bandwidth to help in all kinds of family caregiving or in doing things like community volunteering and things like that. Now, I've mentioned first generation students at college or people in business. This is one of the places where the family can generally not help them to build the sort of networks that they need in order to get ahead. And so if you're coaching them, realize that and help them by reaching out and doing the things then that they need. Now, the next one's the Health and Vitality Network. This is probably pretty obvious, except for one thing I want to mention, and that's appearance. Attractive people over the course of their lifetime make $250,000 more than unattractive people. Attractive children get better breaks from their teachers if they act out. Attractive college students get better grades. Attractive people are more likely to get hired, even when the hiring manager says that they are not being influenced. The research says that they are. What that means is that paying attention to appearance is not a trivial matter from an economic and a career growth perspective. The other thing to note as well is that it has now been determined that your health is a greater determiner of your wealth than is your education. And not only that, the data are better too. The people who benefit the most from good health and in terms of achieving wealth are people who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic status as well. So both in terms of health and in terms of appearance, if you're working with people who are bootstrapping and moving ahead, that's an important thing to consider with them, for them. The next one is an education and enrichment network, and most of us are past that because in my definition, education is what got you to the table. It's what got you to your career. What you do later in terms of career development, that's part of career to me. It's not part of your sort of fundamental education. But what is important then is community enrichment. This is very important for us developing our talent. And for any of you who are familiar with the monastic traditions, one of the things that they've brought to us that I think is so valuable is the notion that when we are away from our work, and we're starting to see that appear more and more in career-focused literature today, when we're away from our work is when we tend to have the most creative ideas and the biggest breakthroughs in terms of problem solving that we may want to do. Next is a spiritual network, which has two parts, religious congregations or personal spirituality. And we know a lot about how those support us and about the positive correlation between being a member of a congregation and having good health. We don't know if that's causal. We just know it's a correlation. And then a social and community network, which starts with our immediate family and friends and grows out from there, particularly as we grew up, could become more independent, drive or use mass transit, and of course now media. Now moving on to the coming of age networks. This is probably where most of you are thinking about in the context of your connections within Beacon. And so is one of the sort of least of the networks that I want to talk about today, because I think that it's the one that we know the best. I do want to encourage you, for those of you who are managers or who are working with managers in the way that they coach people or the coaching with people, that you begin to, what should I say, build awareness that our org charts are lying to us. Our organizational charts are structured as if we were all in neat hierarchies. Well, we're not. We are all now working up and down the chain. We are looking across the silos of our companies. We're working in the operations areas, but also in the support areas and engaging with people there. We are working with people outside the company as customers, as regulators, as stakeholders, as media, as as legislators, and so on. And we're working across time zones. We're working across cultures. We're working. We've just barely begun to affirmatively and positively incorporate different genders within our workforces, only to find out that now people are questioning the nature of gender at all. So the diversity that we are dealing with now, the challenges are so immense that it is worth noting that and being very compassionate with the people that we work with, either on our jobs or that we might be supporting as coaches or managers or whatever, because the degree of complexity that we are now facing in our workforce is something that we have never before encountered. Now, it's also true here within the home and personal affairs networks, the challenge, the problems or the risk of getting it wrong are pretty great. 70% of adult Americans do not have an up-to-date will. So I'm hoping that everybody on this call is, at least if you've not done a will recently or taken a look at it, I would like to encourage you to do that and suggest that if you don't have an up-to-date will, if you do have a lawyer, you may not have the right one. Because if your lawyer was really supporting you, they would be back to you about every 3 years to say, is everything still the same? Do we need to reconsider your will? For the sake of your peace of mind, but also for the sake of the people that you love. I would also say, for those of you who do have a spouse, and for those of you who do have a business partner, understanding not only these dynamics in your life, but also all of the other ones are important too. Some of the most tragic stories that I know from my research are people who, or couples in which the wife died, leaving her husband with 2 small children, and he didn't know the name of the pediatrician because she took care of it. Or in another situation, a couple who realized they had not revised their will since their 3rd child was born, and he was 10. So the husband said that he would take care of it, and he was meeting with an attorney. But he was in Harrisburg on a business trip and dropped dead of a heart attack. Wife didn't know what lawyer he was talking to. Sometimes when I talk to business people, especially people who have a solo practice, I ask if their spouse would know how to collect their accounts receivable if suddenly they were unable to do that themselves because they had an accident or they were seriously injured or maybe even that they died. And no one so far has been able to say affirmatively that that would be the case. So these sorts of situations are difficult, and when you lose a spouse or you lose a business partner, you've lost more than half your heart. You've lost all of the information that only they have. And so this is a good reminder to take a bit of time and make sure that you shared important information with one another. And then finally, one of the more interesting groups of ghosts. Remember I said I didn't go looking for them, but they showed up. So ghosts, as I said, are people who used to be in your life but are no longer. Now, what we know is everybody who comes into your life makes an impression on you for better or not. And even if you never really know them, Carolyn Mace, in her work, issued a call for miracle stories. She got a letter from a young man. He was walking home from work one night, intending that night to end his life. He had stopped at a stoplight, looked up at a woman who was waiting in her car for the light to change. They made eye contact briefly, and she smiled at him. In that moment, he changed his mind and decided not to end his life. How compelling is that? Now imagine all of the people that we met in all of the times that we were growing up and going to school and whatever. Now, so far, at least 3 major types of ghosts have evolved in my conversation with people. One cat group I would call friendly. These are the people who know, who loved you, and by gosh, you knew it. You know, if you think about them today, just close your eyes and imagine how wonderful it was to be with them, all right? They're the ones you should think about when you're having a bad day. Unfortunately for me, I think about the other kind, the hungry ghost. They're the ones that left you with a bruise or a hole in your heart. For me, they come out and they pitch a tent in my office and they scream at me all day. Like, who cares what you have to think? And now they're gonna know you're stupid. You're putting this in print. Now they're gonna know you're stupid. You know, and so these are the ones that are frequently sabotaging and also can create real havoc. If you ever had one of those sudden, inexplicable reactions to somebody or some situation, and you sort of look over your shoulder and you think, who said that? Well, you said it, but you were saying it to a hungry ghost, not to the person who was across the table from you at the time. So it's an important group to know about. And then finally, role models. This happened because a woman said, I'd like to put Oprah on my list, but in my networks, but I mean, I'm never going to meet her, but, like I really admire her, and I thought to myself, why not? I mean, for one thing, it's your network. If you want to put Oprah in it, then go ahead. And then I thought about the principle I mentioned earlier, that every network has a center of gravity. If in this ghost network, you put people that you've never met, could even be fictional characters. I got Yoda in my ghost network. If you aspire to a characteristic and you are conscious about that, you are more likely to become that. Now, I mentioned, and getting close here to the end, pet networks. If you have a pet, especially if you have a dog, it takes a network to support them. And this is another one of those that are consequential. I've had dogs, by the way. I didn't know at the time that some insurance companies, homeowners insurance companies, will not insure you if you have a dog. And if you have a dog and they bite someone and a claim is filed, then they won't renew your insurance. I also didn't realize, and I was a single woman at the time, so this was not an issue, but if you are a woman in a family, you need to realize that women provide 80% of pet care, and that dogs create 2,000 disputes over the course of their lifetime. Now, those are disputes about who walks them, who feeds them, who grooms them, who takes care of them when they're sick, and that sort of thing. That's 3 disputes per week on average. So if you are a working mom or you are coaching a working mom, this is the kind of thing to take into account as you think about, for sure, whether or not you're going to get a dog. I love them too, by the way, I really do. But there is a reality to managing the networks that they have. Okay, just a couple more things, and then we're going to break into a discussion group for a short time and then reconvene for questions.
Glenna?
So how do you really...
Glenna, we have a question.
Great.
So Anne asks, is there only one nomenclature for each person in your network? If so, what is the risk of applying the intent of one category to someone in another category? For example, a close friend who can also help you in your career and vice versa.
Thank you for that question, because that helps to, I can expand a little bit on that. It is absolutely common that you will have one person who can appear in multiple networks. So you may have a friend who is a neighbor who goes to the same church. So now we've got the social network and the spiritual network, who is part of a walking group. So there's your health and vitality network. And also helps you with IT when your computer goes wacky and you don't know what else to do. All right, so there's part of your, maybe a career network. So that is absolutely common. The value of looking at that is severalfold. First of all, it tells you just how important that connection is. That's a connection worth nurturing. So if, for example, you were the mom of that child who had the food allergy, and your child had a classmate who was in Cub Scouts and T-ball and church, then you would know that that kid and that mom is a keeper. And you want to nurture that relationship in order to help protect your child and to give them the experiences that you want. Now, here's the downside to that. And it happens often with people in small businesses. They have a spouse who is the father to their, I'm thinking about several people now, a spouse who's the father to their children, their sounding board for ideas about their company and problems with their employees, and their IT help. So, oh, and by the way, he's the handyman around the house. If something happens to him, that woman becomes instantly vulnerable, not only as a spouse, but as a parent and as a business owner. So in a situation like that, it would be important to say, do I need redundancy somewhere? If my spouse is not available and I need help with IT, is there somebody I know I can call right away for that kind of help? Or my spouse is not available and the roof is leaking. He would ordinarily fix that, but he can't. Well, let's not talk roof. Let's talk the leak under the kitchen sink. I've got to get to an important client meeting and there is a bad leak under the kitchen sink. My spouse can't fix it. Is there somebody that I know who can be my backup so that I can go to this client meeting with a clear head? So I hope that helps, Anne. Okay. Now, how does all this kind of happen? A couple of things that might be, I'm going to tell you about how people do this. First of all, by picking something that's easy. If you've got a problem with a sister-in-law, that's probably not where you want to start, because there are too many close connections and reverberations that can help in a situation like that. It just might be something like, you know what, I got a manicurist that always keeps me waiting and I'm tired of that. I'm going to switch manicurists. So pick something that's easy to free up some bandwidth. But don't neglect something that's important. It is tough to do a will. It is even harder to do a living will. But you make your family and loved ones vulnerable if you don't deal with some of those things. Pick something that's large. Well, Thanksgiving is not going to be at your house this year probably, but if you're always doing the big parties and the big gatherings, see if there's another way to do that. Get guidance where you need it. Turn to experts and realize that people around you are going to resist this change. So don't let them derail you. Now, what have people done? Everybody downsizes and simplifies something. Could be a way they entertain. Could be, lots of people downsize their houses. Get better support where you can and delegate. But I think what really is going to help is that this structure, you know how to do these things. You know how to delegate. You know how to set priorities. What this structure is going to do is help you with ways in which you can do that much more systematically. And then finally, and I'm not going to spend time here because I want to get to the discussion. So Zoe, if you could get ready to tee up the four different, or the different groups that we have planned. This has implications for anything you're doing in an enterprise. Once you understand this about your own life, and I do think we come first, understand it first about yourself, you're going to then be able to apply it to your market and your customers, helping you to refine what unmet needs might be and how to position the value of what you're doing. It's going to help you in managing employees. It'll help your company in understanding what benefits might be better suited for your employees than the ones that you're delivering. But here's where I want to go now. We're going to take about probably no more than 5 minutes, break you into groups. And what I would like you to consider then are these questions. Zoe, the way you have it teed up, each group is going to get one question, correct?
Yes, and I'm also going to put them in the chat so everyone has them once they go into the rooms.
Oh, thank you very much. So if you're ready, what I'd like you to do is just spend about 5 minutes, talk about these questions. We'll call you back after 5 minutes, or if you finish early, come on back. And then this will structure the remainder of our time today. Okay, thanks, Zoe.
Thanks. And Glenna, you can just not accept to join the room because it's going to try to put you in one.
Well, the sage's mom, the sage didn't have any information about her own mom. I have now corrected that. I know everybody in my mom's life, and I take very good care of them. So, all right, breakout group 1. Who is in that, and what things do you most want to remember?
Well, I think we were group 1, I think. And what we remember, I was talking about the distinguishing thing of primary, secondary, and transactional, or support. Excuse me, primary support and transactional was a interesting way to be able to think about the people that are around you and how people can move across those in some cases. Stuart, you had some interesting thoughts about as well. So, and so did Bob, as we all did.
Yeah, just reinforcing what we want to remember is something you mentioned, Glenna, reinforcing the impact that your network can have in your life. Surround yourself with people that has a positive impact, because it could have some really bad consequences if you're not aware that you know your network is influencing you in a negative way. So you know, that's a really good takeaway.
Yeah, and Barbara, your point about people kind of moving around is a good one. I mean, let's face it, if you have a boss today, that boss may be primary, but if you leave that job, that boss may become support, either because they become a continuing mentor, or they give you a recommendation from time to time, or whatever. You know, and I know a couple, she waited on him in a men's clothing store. So that was purely transactional. They've been married now for 25 years. So, so you never know how things might move, you know, sort of, you know, back and forth like that. Yeah, yeah. Okay, group 2, what do you do tomorrow? Is there any piece of information from today that will be useful for you?
Well, I personally am going to go on a diet. No, we talked really, I think, about the the value of categorizing. So that was very similar to the first question, and I brought up that women typically, you know, value their primary friendship relationships. So you know, they don't think about utilizing relationships in other ways. So for me personally, I'm going to go back and think about that I might have a predisposition not to want to cross categories.
You know, there are gender differences in the way that people use this information. So when men, when they have this information, tend to go straight for their career. Women tend to see the whole of their lives, which is why women more than men encounter what I call network crush, which is that overwhelm. Oh my God, I had no idea I had this many people in my life. And it's not an intellectual reaction, it's an emotional overload kind of reaction. The other thing, and I think we corresponded before this. I mean, that if, or I did with someone, if you are looking for a job, you are more likely to find that job from a friend of a friend. See, you and your friends tend to know the same information. So you got to get outside of that network. Well, then the way to do that is to ask your friends if they have a friend that you can meet. The other thing too, Anne, that you just did is you used the term relationship. This was something that I struggled with writing the book. Things become often what you call them. And so if you have a relationship with your spouse, do you have a relationship with a cab driver? Well, no. I mean, you're connecting with both, and you're connecting with them in different ways. Finally then, and this is a message for the men, and it's also a message for the women who have an important man in their life. Now, I'm not going to make a blanket statement about all men, but I am going to say that in my database, in my sample, men tend to outsource their social life to the woman in their life, even if that's not a spouse. Could be a girlfriend, could be a daughter, but they outsource that part of their life. Now, what happens then is that if that woman dies or becomes unable to fill that role, he is very often socially isolated, particularly if he's no longer working. Now, if he's working, there are social connections that come along with work. But if once he's retired, that sort of drifts away. Now, the other thing too is, let's see, women in my sample who are like in their mid 60s, moving towards the 70s, express concern that if they die first, their husbands will become immediately socially isolated. So they're now trying to create social opportunities for their husband. So like, hey, honey, why don't you like invite your friends over and you guys can watch the game and I'll make some snacks and all of that. But the men are resistant. I mean, because they're perfectly fine being with her. And so, you know, like men have told me, it wasn't like one man recently told me it was 5 years since his wife had died. He said, you know, every year we used to go to the Jersey Shore, he said, the whole family. And he said, I'd pay for it. He said, I was glad to pay for it. You know, kids, grandkids, all of them. He said, it wasn't until 5 years after my wife had died that my daughter had assembled us all at her home for a holiday. And I overheard my son saying to my daughter, thank you for getting us together. It's the first time since mom died. And he said that was the first time he realized in 5 years he had not been with the entire family. So that would be like one of the sort of the gender sort of refinements that I've seen in my data. Again, I'm not making a blanket statement. I'm just talking about the data that I have. Okay, group 3. Is there something you would share with somebody? I don't know who was in group 3, so somebody's gonna have to fess up.
I think it was us. Go ahead, Mahendra.
No, I thought Sophia had a good sharing. She did kind of good job. So, or Joy, you can do that.
I'm with you. I nominate Sophia.
Sophia.
Am I on mute?
No, you're fine. We hear you.
Awesome. What I said was that this was reminiscent of a lot of the work that I've done as a career coach in prompting people to network more broadly and not think narrowly about who they know in their life. I was a LinkedIn early adopter, February 1st, 2005. So I'm all about networking. And I actually have a call scheduled with my son this evening because he's transitioning out of doing census work and wants to figure out what he's going to do next. So I think there's a lot that is of value. I actually was looking up on Amazon to see how much your book was. So I think there's a lot to be shared from this session.
Yeah, I think it provides a structure. Again, you know, it's so many of our connections are hiding in plain sight. We tend, like those students at Harvard, we tend to focus on what's right there in front of us, and we forget about everybody else. I mean, one of the forms of data display that I use is a mind map. And by the way, if anybody is interested in doing this for yourself and using a mind map, I describe it in the book, but whatever, you can be in contact with me. I will put you in touch with the person who creates my mind maps. It is a very simple program. It drives off of an outline. That's all you have to do is outline these networks and your connections. And like the woman that I told you who tripled the size of her business in down near South Street, she took this mind map to Kinko's and blew it up huge and put it on her bathroom wall. And that's how she did her strategic planning. She would lay in the bath at night and she would look at this diagram and she'd say, oh, I see what's going on. I need to change this or that. So if you are interested, you could please feel free to follow up with me afterwards and I'll help you create that mind map. Okay, group 4. What else can I do for you today?
Who was in group 4?
That was Charlie, Lori, Margaret, and Pamela.
So we answered the first question, not the fourth question.
Okay, so what did you?
So nothing.
We were a little bit outside the box here.
Okay.
But what I think we all agree to is this stuff's in our head. And we have to get it down on paper. We have to be able to see it because in a time of crisis or anxiety, we don't think clearly. But if it's on a piece of paper, if it's on the wall of our bathroom, as you suggest, we don't run out of ideas of people with whom we need to connect. And it's in my head. I don't have it down on paper. And the group sort of agreed with that.
Right.
The others in the group, please add to what I just said.
I think that summarizes it really well, Charlie.
I do have a question, Glenna.
Please, go ahead.
Any thoughts on this framework works? Thank you so much for all of this information. I mean, there's a lot, and I'll definitely listen to the recording again. and the framework works for all networks. Any thoughts or ideas or suggestions for people in the sandwich generation dealing with parents and also children?
Yeah, my heart goes out to you, first of all. So first of all, let me say that I'm going to be doing a series of webinars, very short, like 20 minutes each, in which I'm going to take chunks of these networks and lay them out. And I'm going to do some special sessions just for sandwich caregivers. So I'll give you some ideas that you can do with your children, and I'll give you some ideas that you can do with your parents. Also, Margaret, if you'll be in touch with me or anybody else who's interested, I'm easy to reach, Glenna at glennacrooks.com. I will send you some case studies that go through this information in considerably more detail. My key counsel to a sandwich caregiver today is, as soon as you possibly can, get this information about the elders you're caring for. You need to know everything about the connections in their life. If they are resistant, do yours first and share that with them, because the reality is, within a family, we all need to know this about one another. And by the way, and I'm not suggesting that you know how much is in their bank account. I'm suggesting that you understand their connections such that if you had to act, you would know who to call to do that. Again, my own painful story of my mom, and even now, I mean, I joke that I take very good care of these people, but I do. My mom is 1,000 miles away. So when I go to visit her, we have dinner parties and I entertain these people. And at the holidays, they get Harry and David fruit. And at Mother's Day, they get a card from me. Because, and whether you're the senior you care about in your life is across town or across the country, it can be just as disruptive for you to go across town to check on them if they don't answer the phone, than almost it is for me to get to Florida. So you need to know who the neighbors are, so that if you can't reach a parent, you can call the neighbor and say, I can't get mom, can you run next door and see if she's okay? I mean, that will just give you tremendous peace of mind. And then I would suggest, if your children are old enough, this has really been a good exercise that parents, especially fathers, have told me. Kids like showing off who's in their networks to their parents. And this gives parents, and particularly fathers who feel so protective of, like, especially their teenage girls, they say, she's about to get into situations that I'm not sure she can handle. This is my opportunity to talk to her about all the people in her life and find out who's going to be a positive influence and who's not, and to have all those kinds of teachable moments. So, I mean, kids as young as 7, with a little bit of guidance, have been able to figure out who's all in their networks. And in doing so, it's given parents a lot more information that they found useful on behalf of their kids. Now, I know that in the COVID era, you're probably keeping your kids closer. But here's another reason. Half of children who go missing are actually with someone they know, but the parent doesn't know it. Now, I still remember when my 3-year-old brother went missing and the police sitting at the kitchen table. My mom could not remember her own name at that moment. So if you gather this information about your kids' connections, if something happens and they should happen to go missing, you at least, and the police at least, know right where to start. In those in today's world, those minutes could make a difference. So
Glenna, we have a question from Pamela. At the beginning, you mentioned that as you personally started to do this work, people noticed a change in you, and that is what made you realize that there was something to this. What were the changes that people were noticing in you?
Oh, okay. I had more time for friends. I got healthier. I looked better, lost a lot of weight. My income also went up. Now, this was accompanied by something else. Around the same time, I took my company to a 4-day work week. And our income doubled year on year after that for about 4 straight years. And then it just hit the ceiling. We couldn't go any higher than that. So it was, and because my income went up, I had more degrees of freedom. I was more relaxed. I didn't have to work so hard. I was happier. And I think that's what they saw. But it wasn't until they did it, and especially that the woman with the child with Asperger's, man, when it hit with her, that's when I realized there's probably something to this, and it would be worthwhile to continue to work on it. So that was probably year 1 of what became a 10-year study. I'm at year 12 now, but I wrote the book after year 10. And, and now, by the way, I'm deeply involved. I mentioned that there was some enterprise value. Companies, industries are doing customer journeys these days. I'm now significantly and deeply involved in doing patient journeys, but not just looking at the patient in the moments that they're in a hospital or in a doctor's office with a disease, but when somebody has a disease condition, it goes every place they go. It affects every network that they have, pretty much, in many cases. And so now we're able to take a bigger look at that person's life and look at them as a person who happens to have a condition. And then say, well, knowing that, then what can we do to support them? It just enlarges it. And I think that will be true. I can't prove it because I haven't done this with other forms of customer journeys, but I have a gut instinct that it will be true for a lot of what we do in dealing with customers and stakeholders and so on. Right. It has been great to be with you. Now you know how to reach me, those of you who didn't before. And you know what my current passion is. As you can tell, I can talk about this forever and have a ton more stories to share if they ever become relevant to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. This has been wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity from Beacon to do that. Zoe, thank you so much for all your help, and Heather for connecting and making this happen.
Glenna?
Yeah, Charlie?
What can we do to help you? That's number 4, I think, right?
Charlie, I was looking at my bookshelf the other day and there was Go Giver on it. And I thought, oh, I still haven't given that away. I can't part with it yet. I guess I have 2 requests. First of all, if you choose to use this, let me know and tell me a story. I'll protect your privacy as and your confidentiality. I won't share anything you don't want shared, but if it adds to the mix of things I can help other people with, you might be pleased about that, so do. And secondly, I am looking for other audiences to speak with and people who might benefit from this. And if you happen to run into somebody who's interested in investing in a technology that will digitize all of this, I'd love to know. My partner and I were on the verge of having a recording or having an investor when COVID hit. It's not stopped dead in the water, but it is slowed down. So we're interested in looking at other alternatives. And Charlie, thank you for asking. Yeah,
so have you thought about how this can be utilized for the nonprofit community specifically? Because what you're describing is, in my opinion, the utilization of friendship building towards an organization for, let's say, the board members and the advisory committee members to think through who can they access to support a cause, a mission, or a nonprofit in ways that many board members don't think through. And so they're leaving on the table many, many people in their network that can support whatever interests they might have.
As a matter of fact, we've done that for several nonprofits and created some other displays of this sort of network type that they can use for strategic planning. And then in addition to that, for some particular nonprofits in certain areas, like for example, to help women who are leaving abusive situations, to understand their networks and to create positive networks that will support them making a transition into being able to support themselves and have support so that they don't wind up back in a bad situation. So yeah. Now in situations like that, I don't actually work with the client population. I work with the experts and teach the experts who then work with their client population. So yes.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.